Hello Pokemon Masters, Birkeeper Toby here, and welcome back to the wonderful world of Pokemon. In this part, we're going to explore the exotic Hoenn region. With high volcano peaks, vast oceans, and blistering deserts, the life here has evolved to be pretty interesting. So let's start with a new type of life form in this series, and one that I find kinda hard to pronounce: echinoderms. This is a type of life form that exists in the water and is known for its 5-point radius symmetry. You might know them typically as starfish, but in the Hoenn region, the most notable member of its classification is Cradilly, and this is based off of sea lilies. This ancient monstrosity may have given way to an abundance of life in the Pokemon world, but it may not be related to the life forms that we know today. This is because sea lilies in the real world exist at the bottom of the ocean, and their environments have not changed much. They exist so far away from the rest of the planet and can't really move in the same way that Cradilly can. Anyway, the normal route to go down is mollusks, like Swallow, which would be our first non-shelled mollusk. And from here we can see the split into arthropods. In this generation, Armaldo is another fossil Pokemon just like Kabutops, who may be an ancestor to many of the other kinds of arthropods. In the Hoenn region, this includes Beautifly and Dustox, again a butterfly and a moth. And speaking of moths, there is also Flygon, who seems to be more based off of a moth than a dragon. Trapinch is the ant-lion Pokemon, which are insects that trap and eat ants, like Durant, meaning again that yes, Flygon, it's a bug. May not be a bug type, but it is a bug. Masquerain is another insect based off of the lanternfly, and Ninjask, as well as its close relative Shedinja, are cicadas, much like Parasect. Also in the world of bugs are Volbeat and Illumise, who are based off fireflies. Crawdaunt shows itself as a close relative of Kingler, however, it's said to be an invasive species, not actually originating in the Hoenn region. And interestingly, there are connections between this Pokemon and another Pokemon in the Hoenn region, Sharpedo, which is obviously a shark, and as we've discussed before, closer related to manta rays like Mantine than it is to other fish, and this is because it has a skeleton made of cartilage and not bone. And it seems likely that in the Hoenn region, Crawdaunt has evolved to look like Sharpedo underwater to intimidate its prey, and possibly to scare off predators like other Sharpedo. You can see this based on the shape of its mouth as well as the star on its head, just like Sharpedo's. There's also another closely related odd type of fish known as a Jawless Fish, and this is where Wishcash comes from. It's based off of a catfish. And it has, being a jawless fish, you guessed it, no jaw, allowing it to do all sorts of things like swallow a master ball. The more typical bony fish of the region come in the form of Lovedisc, Huntail, and Gorbis. Huntail and Gorbis being eels. There is some debate about Gorbis, who represents both an eel and the long-nosed chimera, which is actually more closely related to sharks and rays. However, most seem to agree on it being a fish. Again, debate might exist with its pre-evolution Clamperl, although Clamperl itself may not be a clam, but more likely a fish egg. Either way, we focus on the final evolutionary form, and that here is Gorbis and Huntail. They are fish, and there is one fish in the Hoenn region that has the highest importance when it comes to this tree. Enter Relicanth. Now, Pokemon Masters, the sea life in the Hoenn region is abundant, but there's one Pokemon we've got to have a look at, and that is Relicanth. Relicanth is what's known as a living fossil. But why? Well, it's a creature that has existed in more or less the same form for the longest time. It's based off the coelacanth in our world, a fish that was said to be extinct for over 66 million years, and then suddenly it turned up in the 1930s. So, what gives? Well, it seems what might be going on here and how a creature like Relicanth can possibly exist is while most creatures tend to diversify as they evolve over millions of years, adapting their looks, shapes, and capabilities in the ever-changing landscape that is the planet, sometimes you just can't fix what isn't broken. If the environment that Relicanth has lived on has remained consistently the same with very little change, a consistent food source, not too many new predators, or perhaps the environment just doesn't change very much, then there's no reason for this Pokemon to diversify, and the new specialized genetic traits don't get passed down consistently enough. This means that while Relicanth has been evolving, just as every other animal always is on the planet, its form has stayed relatively the same over millions of years. It will of course look slightly different, some traits may have passed down, but it's more or less the same creature, and that's why the coelacanth and Relicanth are known as living fossils. However, many of the coelacanths may have moved away from the oceans and eventually evolved over millions of years to become amphibians, and that's where we're looking next. And there is just one amphibian in this region, and I told you in the last part you'd be seeing the Axolotl again, the Pokemon that Wooper and Quagsire are based off of, and here, well, I heard you like Mudkips. Swampert, of course, is based off of this animal, and again, it is a water ground type, just like Quagsire. Another starter Pokemon is just on the other side of the tree, a Reptile Sceptile. You can even see it in the name. And it's not the only green lizard in Hoenn. Kecleon's there as well. Seviper, of course, is a snake and likely very closely related to Arbok, and Torkoal is a tortoise. In with the other types of reptiles, Draconis is Milotic, which is absolutely an offshoot of Gyarados' line. Not only are these Pokemon incredibly similar, but Magikarp, the pre-evolution of Gyarados, is the most abundant Pokemon on the planet. It can be found literally everywhere, and when you're found everywhere, you are food for everyone. So there's some compelling reasons here as to why Feebas and Milotic have evolved the way they have. If you look as ugly as a Feebas, you are less likely to get eaten. You'll look like a Magikarp that's gone off, and then when you evolve into a Milotic, you are most likely to breed. When you're just that pretty amongst a sea of very ugly looking Gyarados, you're very likely to find a mate and pass down your genes, and Gyarados, of course, being the terrifying Pokemon that it is, will protect the young of Milotic, meaning the genes that create Feebas are even more likely to survive. However, the reason that Feebas is so rare is because Magikarp is just so abundant in number. There are so many of them that it's unlikely that Milotics are breeding together, and most of them are breeding with Gyarados. Most Feebases are also breeding with Magikarp in their local areas, and Magikarp eggs have the lowest hatch rate. That meaning, the eggs hatch the quickest. These Pokemon swarm everywhere, and so just in the fight of sheer numbers, Feebas's DNA is less likely to get passed down, and more likely to return to that of Magikarp's. And of course, with Magikarp's intense swarming abilities, that's simply how its DNA has managed to survive. Yes, it gets eaten by everyone, but at the same time, there's just so many of it can't all be eaten. Now, there is, of course, another big dragon in Hoenn, which is Salamence, and its pre-evolution can be found in Meteor Falls, and is, of course, a true dragon, putting it up there with Charizard. And as well as dragons, there's a new type of living dinosaur in Aggron. Aggron is, again, one of those living dinosaurs. It's not a rhino like Nidoking and Nidoqueen. There's actually a Pokemon in the next generation that ties it in with the dinos even further. But for now, if it helps, think of it more like Tyranitar. And speaking of the dinos, there is one that is just like Meganium, and this is Tropius. They are both grass-type behemoths with vegetation growing from their necks. The only difference is that Tropius can soar high to the skies, like the birds. Swallow, Pelipper, and Altaria are the more obvious-looking birds, being based off of a swallow, a pelican, and a mythological bird known as a peng. However, there are some odd-looking birds here, one of my favourite being Blaziken. This is based off of a Shamo chicken, which I believe are some of the coolest-looking birds, and I should know I am a bird keeper. Ludicolo also has a ton of odd traits, but definitely seems to be some kind of duck. Just look at that beak, putting it right up there with Golduck and Farfetch'd. And now finally we return to the ground in the world of Mammalia, and we'll start with those human-like mammals with Medicham and Hariyama, as well as the ape-like Pokemon in Slacking. Breloom is a marsupial. It's a kangaroo, and it would seem to be more based off of a kangaroo than a mushroom. It's a kangaroo with mushrooms growing on it. Now, there is a type of mammal that I've really been wanting to talk about all series so far, and that is cetaceans. And cetaceans are mammals that have returned to the sea, and they are what whales are. What whale lord is. They aren't fish, they don't have gills that breathe water, no, they have lungs and they need to breathe air. However, given their adaptations, even though they have lungs and have evolved to have lived on land in the past, they do need to live in the oceans. They simply wouldn't be able to survive on the land. However, if you wanted to see what they would look like on land, well, look no further than their closest living relatives, hippopotamuses, which you know there's a Pokemon in the next generation that is based off of one. Now, other closely related animals are camels, like Camerupt, Grumpig, which is pig, and Walrein, which is walrus. Wow, these names are really on the nose. Into Carnivora, there is the weasel Pokemon, Linoon, the dog Pokemon like Mightyena and Absol, and the bear, Spinder. There is also a mongoose in Zangoose, and the cat Pokemon, Delcatty. These Pokemon are all really obviously placed based on their real-world counterparts. Now, let's take a look at the rodents, because there is something interesting here. Plusle and Minun. These are actually a little bit more based off of rabbits. We know that in every generation of Pokemon there is an electric rodent that looks a little bit like Pikachu. However, they're all based on different animals, so should I place them more scattered across the Tree of Life? I'm thinking not. We know that the Pokemon world is a little bit different to ours, at least. They have dragons and ghosts and plants that are alive. We'll get to the ghosts and plants a little bit later on, so it seems reasonable to expect that all of these rodents probably are very closely related. Plusle and Minun are probably closer related to Raichu and Alolan Raichu than it is to, say, Azumarill, which shares the rabbit-like ears. Speaking of rabbit-like ears, there is the final Pokemon of Hoenn that we need to talk about, and that is Exploud. This Pokemon was hard to place because it is literally a walking boombox. There is not a lot to go on. This is one of the rare occasions where we do have to look to the pre-evolution, and Whismur is the only Pokemon in this line that shares any resemblance to an animal at all. Again, a rabbit. It's got its little rabbit tail and its big old ears, so that is where I am going to place Exploud, but maybe you have a better suggestion. Hopefully the Pokemon of the Sinnoh region are a little bit clearer to define. But now we can pull back and have a look at Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn all together on a Tree of Life. There's only 4 more regions to go, but 9 more episodes. There is a lot more to discuss in the wonderful world of Pokemon. You know, in this series, I really like exploring the ancient forms of life, like Relicanth, Cradilla, or Armaldo. But there are other Pokemon that are ancient, like Groudon and Kyogre, but we're going to have to explore those in later parts. They are the stuff of myth. Speaking of which, the next part will cover the region known for its myth and folklore, the Sinnoh region. Please, of course, engage with me in the comments, and as always, soar high, Pokemon Masters.